Hello there, YouTube. Devin here again. Sorry I'm a day late behind when I normally put a video out. I didn't put a video out yesterday because simply I just did not feel like getting out of bed to save my life. That's about it. I didn't care if the building was burning down around me. Just had one of those days, you know? But we're back here today and we're gonna do a very, very popular helmet that I'm sure just about everyone has heard of because just about everyone in the world has seen one or held one or is aware of it at one point, and that would be on the American M1 helmet. The M1 helmet has a very storied, long history, probably a lot longer than it really should have been in service, but it's a helmet design that I tend to have a couple issues with, but I actually really quite enjoyed this helmet for the history. As far as its like protection and like ergonomics and everything goes, I actually kind of have some problems with it compared to other contemporary designs of the time. But it is much better than what the US was currently fielding at the time. So, and I got both the versions here that I'll show you. So I'll put one on, and I'll hold the other one where I'm talking to you about the history of the M1 helmet. So the M1 helmet, actually, the history of it goes all the way back to about 1920. A lot of people don't seem to understand that, but the Americans after World War I were looking for something to replace their versions of the Brody helmet. Now, it would eventually be this helmet, which we'll get into here in a second. But it was developed, the closest design to the M1 where it can actually trace its kind of origins and roots back, goes all the way back to a curator of an arms museum developed during the last days of World War I a new helmet to replace the Brody, but it was rejected because it looked too much like a Stahl helm. But that design would trigger throughout the 20s the US military to test this helmet and many other designs to try to find something that it could use to replace the Brody. Now, ultimately, the U.S. military would be strapped for money and funding and end up just upgrading the 1917 helmet, which was just a copy of the British 1915 Brody helmet. So, yada yada, this and that. Long story short, the U.S. ends up adopting this, which is essentially now just an easier to maintain Brody helmet. Now, the US M1917A1, as this called, is made with a lot of M1917 shells. The US made 2.7 million of them during the First World War, and they would eventually manufacture them just like this. But what they would do is, the problem with the M1917 helmet, and with the Mark I Brody as well, is that it was all one piece. The liner had to be brought back to a factory, basically, and taken apart to be repaired, which isn't really good for logistics. So the US didn't really like that. They liked kind of simplifying logistics. The big hampering for militaries historically has always been logistics. That's what kills you. That's what makes or breaks a war or a battle, is logistics and supply. The US didn't like having to send a helmet all the way back to a factory in order to get it fixed. So what they would do is they would design it to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier to manufacture, and a little bit easier to fix in the field. And by doing that, they basically replaced the rivet on the top with this little brass round nut and screw that holds in an aluminum frame. So you can see one of the tails of the aluminum frame. There's 4 tails on it that would be covered in this leather liner rather than like the oilcloth and the net and the wool, and then it would have a little horsehair filled leather crown pad up here. So then they would also replace the chin strap with leather to canvas. That's about all that they would do to make this helmet, and this helmet would actually serve all the way through World War II, and a lot of these would be updated to have a Riddell type suspension system and used into the 80s by the Merchant Navy. And stuff like that for a very, very long time. So this one happens to be an original one. This is a Navy one. This would be like a ship number or an inventory number on a ship. So this one probably would have been used through World War II. But in 1940, the military is realizing that they desperately need to replace the Brody helmet. The Brody helmet is not offering the protection they're using. They're realizing that the war is not going to be like World War I anymore, where you're not going to have trenches and parapets and everything to protect you from the sides and back. Your helmet is going to need to protect your head from more degrees of angle than just above. So they would eventually try to come up with a design. They would just go back and start testing helmets, and this would be what they would be developing. And now, apparently the M1, according to military documentation, this is actually based off the M1917 and that old design from the end of World War I that curator of the Arms Museum developed. So what they said that they did to design this helmet was they took the M1917, cut the rim off of it, and then extended a skirt down. Essentially is how they said they designed this, to cover more of the sides and back of the helmet, of the head. And then it would be almost immediately approved at the end of 1941. You would not start seeing it, though, until 1942. I had a huge argument with somebody about that in my last M1 video, where somebody's like, it was designed in 1941. And I'm like, yeah, they were produced in the end of 1941. But I almost guarantee they did not reach anybody in numbers until 1942, just because of how logistics are. They're not going to take one helmet at the second it rolls off the assembly line and start, shipping them out to people. It also takes time to crank up a factory. It takes time to make the dies to make these. It takes time to, get the steel to where the factory is to make this crap. It takes time to assemble the liners. It takes time to do all that, and then to ship everything out to the Army, and then for the Army to ship it out to the units. So people don't seem to understand that. So you basically don't see any of these until 1942, but they start being made at the end of 1941. So it would serve all the way through World War II. It would go through a couple different upgrades in World War II. Originally, it would be this kind of steel shell. It would be seamed at the front. These helmets have a rim on them to keep you from cutting yourself, and also if you drop the helmet or bang it on something, it's not going to develop a sharp edge that could possibly injure the soldier. They used to be seamed here at the front, where they would be pinch welded, and that ended up being bad because it ended up cutting the soldiers, and that little edge would catch on stuff, and eventually it would kind of damage the rim of the helmet. So they would move that to the rear during World War II. They would also initially have the bales for holding the chin strap on be welded directly, again, pinch welded to the shell, and those tended to break off. So they would pretty quickly switch to a swivel bale design. As you can see, there's this the D-ring goes through this little loop so it can swivel back and forth, which keeps it from breaking. And probably the biggest change is they would initially have a liner that was basically paper mache, called a low pressure liner. It was a very thick liner. It had the same type of suspension in it that they would all have, and the chin strap would be affixed to the shell, but this liner tended to not do so hot in the humidity and the heat and stuff like that. It tended to kind of fall apart and rot away quite easily, so they would switch to what they would call the high pressure liners, which would be made out of stuff like Corlon, which we will see a lot later in a lot of helmet designs. And Corlon is basically a compressed canvas and resin. You would see them made out of fiberglass. You could see them made out of a bunch of different fabrics and resin, really, really hot pressed together into what we know as most of the M1 helmet liners being made out of. Eventually, way towards the end of its life, they would start making them out of other materials, such as Kevlar and other weird stuff to kind of test for more impact resistance, not really to provide ballistic resistance, but to provide more impact deformation, a little bit better than the Corlon and the fiberglass ones. But that would be the big changes you would see during World War II. You would see a change from the liner being low pressure to being high pressure, and then you would see the transition from the shells being front seam to rear seam, and the bales going from fixed to swivel, working out the kinks. But it was overall a massive, massive, massive improvement in protection for soldiers over the 1917 A1 Kelly helmet, which was standard issue up until basically 1942, when it started to be replaced by these. It would serve all the way through Korea, In Vietnam, you would see kind of some different designs. You happen to see a slightly smaller version of the M1 shell come out during Vietnam. There was contracts made during Vietnam. Otherwise, other than that, in World War II in Korea, you see what's called the large format M1 helmet, and they're almost impossible to tell dimensionally. The World War II and Korean ones from the Vietnam made ones, because they were used kind of interchangeably and all the parts are basically interchangeable. But the steel shell would change to be slightly smaller, ever so slightly smaller on the Vietnam contracts, and that's probably just because of who made them and the steel press type and stuff like that. It doesn't affect the helmet, doesn't do anything. They are still one size fits all. The M1 helmet is designed to be a one size fits all helmet. So the liner, which I'll show you when we flip the camera around and look at the liners. We'll compare the 1917 A1 to the two separate versions of the M1 helmet. So liner, and I don't have a low pressure liner, but there's two different types of suspension for the most part that you can find. You would see during World War II, you would see the Riddell type helmet liner, which would have a little donut ring, be adjusted at the top and everything like that. It was made out of cotton fabric, a leather sweatband, adjustable. It would have a infantry style, and then there would be an airborne style. And the airborne style would have a different chin strap affixed to the liner rather than the shell to make it a little bit more stable for jumps. Later on, you would see improved versions of both of those where they would kind of improve the crown strap layout of the Riddell system. You see that happen during the Vietnam War, where it makes it a little bit more comfortable. Rather than having that donut, they have a series of overlapping straps that would be adjustable so that donut does not cut into your head as bad. And you would see updates to the chin straps and the attachment methods and stuff like that. And material changes throughout World War II and later iterations, which makes the M1 helmet so collectible. You could also find, like in the case of this helmet, this is a World War II made liner that would be updated to the later Vietnam pattern, because the Americans really could recycle stuff if it was in good condition. So the M1 helmet, you could spend your whole life collecting different versions and variations of the M1 helmet to use for different stuff. And there's people out there that have hundreds of M1 helmets and not a single one is the same. As far as the liner configuration and the materials in it and the colors of it and all this other stuff, the orientation of how the liner was made, the different manufacturers of the liners, the different types of colors used in the paint on the helmet and everything like that. It would be tons of different stuff. So it's a really, really cool helmet to collect and get into collecting, because there is so many of them out there. And then you could even go further if you want to not just collect the American ones and collect all the other ones that tons of countries used, because basically every country that America influenced used the M1 or tested the M1 at some point that you can get. Most of Western Europe would have used the M1 or a derivative of the M1 at some point. Lots of African countries use the M1, lots of Middle Eastern countries use the M1, lots of Asian countries use the M1. Pretty much everybody at some point used an M1 or at least tested it. So, but the M1 helmet would be used until 1985, where it would be phased out pretty much by all combat units, at least kind of frontline units. You would see the PASGAT come out in 1983, but not fully replacing it with frontline troops until 1985. And then we'll compare. There you go. We have the M1 helmet to the PASGAT right there. So, and the PASGAT would be based off of the M1 style suspension and stuff like that, and chin strap layout for the infantry anyways, and it would be very user-friendly to a soldier, but adding a ton of weight, but offering a ton of extra protection for that added weight. And if you're interested in the PASGAT, I have a video on the PASGAT and some variations of that if that's something that interests you. But if you're interested and you want to stick around now and you weren't just here for the history, but you want to see some kind of differences and similarities between the paratrooper models and the infantry models and stuff like that, as well as to what it replaced, stay tuned, because I'm about to flip the camera around and we will show you what the liner looks like. Alrighty, so here we are back again, and we have both of the M1 helmets that I have here, the two versions. These are both post-Vietnam versions, or at least Vietnam versions of the helmet liners. But you can kind of see this one. This one's kind of the earlier World War II style high pressure liner. It's that very dark brown, very fine kind of cloth material used in making the liner. And then this would be one that you would tend to see kind of later in Vietnam and post-Vietnam, where it's a lot coarser, a lot rougher edged and everything like that. But it's still basically the same helmet liner, just kind of some different stuff. So I'm trying to get these to balance here so they don't tip over because they're so round and bulbous. There we go. But you can see that this has the later Riddell style where they're both the overlapping straps rather than the donut that you would see. And the donut would be 3 kind of triangles coming from different angles that would be tied with a donut at the top rather than a series of overlapping straps. But this is much more comfortable. Soldiers much preferred this. And everything. You would see, as you can see here, these are both swivel bales. I don't have any fixed bale ones. I did have one fixed bale one, but one bale was broken on it, and that was a long time ago, and I ended up selling that to a World War II collector for a hefty profit. I should eventually shell out the money and get a World War II one again. But I used to have a ton of M1 helmets, and I sold a lot of them off to a lot of different people that really wanted them. So you see that this has the later nape pads too, which would normally be connected via these little metal brackets. I don't have either of those in right now because they tend to get kind of cut up and bent, and the fabric gets kind of stretched and pulled in weird directions when I stack them all, so I don't have those in all the time. But you can see the 2 different chin strap setups here. This one, as you can see, has the chin strap up and around the back, which was very common a lot of times, but you could see that it would turn. You would just unhook this and you could wear it like a normal chin strap. This is the later version of the chin strap. It's all steel, white metal, and it's held in place with this little ball and this hook. You would see later, so the earlier versions of the PASGAT would have this style of liner, this style of chin strap closure where it's brass and it's just a little hook that rides over this little kind of arrow-shaped piece in this tab buckle. The Americans would eventually change that for a lot of reasons that a lot of other countries did. So as you can see, it's the same basic setup. And what they would do is they would take the hook wouldn't change really, but this tab would change, and they would put this little bracket on here with this little ball. And what that ball was designed to do was break away in an explosion or something, or if you got your head caught, your helmet would pull off rather than putting too much strain on your neck. This little ball would just pull through or break off rather than having rather than having to manually undo it. You could pull hard enough and this would break. In the event of an explosion or something where there's too much pressure being caught in the helmet, or your helmet just snags on something or anything like that, rather than it breaking your neck, your helmet chin strap is designed to fail on purpose in order for your helmet to come off before it kills you. You wouldn't see that on the World War II ones. This one you pretty much have to undo in order to get off your head. Here we have one of the later paratrooper versions, and as you can see, it does still have a regular chin strap right here. It's held in place with a little kind of snap underneath this tab of cloth, but it routes through the bales on the on the helmet shell itself and around. Same kind of breakaway closure that you would find on the later ones, but you see this different chin strap added in the liner, which gives a lot more stability for jumps and stuff like that, because a 2-point chin strap is good for the regular infantry, but when you're jumping out of a plane, you need a little bit more stability to keep your helmet from falling off your head. And that was a problem that they realized very quickly, making the paratroops in World War II and stuff like that. And it would be something they would forget in the time, and then they would go and develop the PASGAT, and the PASGAT would have the same problem with its 2-point chin strap. It would ultimately lead to them developing a couple different chin straps for the PASGAT and some quick fixes and stuff to keep the helmets from falling off soldiers' heads while they were jumping out of a plane. So we'll compare. This is the 1917 A1 Kelly helmet. This is the other primary American World War II helmet to the liner on the M1 helmet. So as you can see, there's a world of difference here and everything like that. One's obviously leather, one's kind of canvas. And it's good that you see a lot of American stuff made out of cotton. For a long time, they're the world's #1 cotton producer. You can see the levels of protection here have increased huge. This helmet sits way higher on the head than the M1. This helmet's much more designed for overhead protection, whereas this is for protection from a lot more different directions and other cool stuff like that. And you could, like I said, you could see so many different variations of liners and different colors and materials and setups and configurations and different types of liner shells and all this other stuff. You could spend your whole lifetime collecting M1 helmets and things like that. I'm sure there's information and stuff that I'm missing and everything, because I'm just not going to be able to cover it in a video this is already going to be a long video. But I'm not just going to be able to cover it in a video that's short enough to be watchable, basically. So, but we'll flip the camera back around and we'll wrap up the video here and all that other cool stuff, teach you about some other things, and yada yada, this and that. If you're interested in the manufacturer of your helmet, there is little number codes on steel. And if you're interested in figuring out who made your liner, you might not be able to see it down in there. But there's a little, right there where the light kind of is shining, there's a little indent and there's a logo there. And if you can make that out, that is the Firestone F logo. So all the liners will be marked down there. All the American ones will be anyways. So you can look it up, what all those little letters and numbers mean, and figure out who made your liner, when it was made, and all that other cool stuff. Everything like that. There's a lot of information you could track down on the M1. So, and some neat little things like that, which is why collectors love to collect M1s, because there's so many of them out there. There's so many different versions, and they all have cool information on them. So, and some companies that still are around today made parts for the M1. As you can see, the Firestone Tire Company made M1 liners. So, and all that other good stuff. But we'll flip the camera back around and we'll wrap up the video here. Alrighty, so hope you guys learned something about the M1 today and all the other cool stuff. It's, like I said, it's a helmet that I could go on to for hours and hours and hours and about every little detail and everything like that. But this is just an overview, okay? This is just an overview, okay, you guys? If you go into the comments and you start telling me a bunch of shit that's different about the M1, this is an overview, okay? I'm not covering everything by far. I will call you an idiot and ask you if you watched the video if you didn't get all this, all right? There's definitely details and stuff that I'm missing, okay? I 100% understand that. This is an overview. But now we'll go around and we'll show you how the M1 kind of looks and fits on somebody's head. As you can see, it's a giant kind of bulbous helmet. It is, again, one size fits all. But I'm going to spin around here, show you guys how it looks and everything like that being worn by a soldier. So here's it from the front. Here's it from the side, the rear. Now this helmet is, even with their little nape pads, works quite well when you're looking up. It doesn't really cut in, wearing nothing. But you would see towards Vietnam where they would come up with the high-collared body armors, the M1 helmet would actually tend to get in the way, which is kind of an issue, but it's ultimately better than not being, you know, it's ultimately better than getting shot in the head. But you would see a lot of troops in Vietnam purposely not wear their M1 helmets. For one, they were hot, they were heavy, and everything like that. But the M1 helmet would also be worn oftentimes with just its liner. It was meant to function as a construction helmet. MPs and stuff would have liners that would be specifically painted like MPs, because you didn't need to be wearing the full-on heavy steel helmet all the time. Behind the lines, but if you're working around heavy equipment or something, it's going to keep stuff from bumping into your head and cracking your noggin. So that's a cool feature about the M1 because it is a two-piece design. So you would see the early liners with a leather chin strap, and later they just wouldn't have a liner chin strap on them and everything like that. It was deemed unnecessary. But hopefully you learned something today about this video. If you think I am worth a contribution, it means the absolute world to me. If you want to become a member on Patreon, if you become a lifetime member on Patreon, you get access to the Discord, where you can join me and all the other cult members, talk about helmets, talk about food, talk about other old man stuff, coffee, tons of stuff under the sun. We had a conversation about short shorts the other day, and weird uniforms, and historical events, and everything else under the sun. It's a really cool place if you think you want to be a part of that. It's also the place where you get access to early sales if I'm planning on selling anything. Discord members get first come, first serve because they do pay me. All that other good stuff if that's something that interests you, and it goes a long way to help support the channel. If you can't do that, by all means, just like, comment, subscribe. It helps in the algorithms. all that other good stuff. Yeah, share it with your friends and everything if there's something you need to be interested in. I'm always open to suggestions for future videos and stuff in the comments as well. If it's within my means, I will be able to do that. But don't ask me if I have something, all right? Like, ludicrously hard to get and expensive, because chances are I'm not going to be able to do that. I do have some kind of rarer, harder to get helmets that I plan on doing videos on eventually, but don't be asking me about helmets that are now like $1,000, because I probably won't be able to do that. And then especially don't ask me that if you're not paying me any money, because then I probably never will be able to afford that. But thank you all for watching. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon member, there will be a link that you could copy-paste right into your browser, right in the description of the video, and all that other good stuff. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. Thank you all for stopping by. Once again, I'm sorry the video is a day late. I just could not, for the life of me, find my motivation yesterday, and all the other good stuff. I didn't go out and party or anything on Halloween or anything. I stayed home and did nothing, and watched Netflix and drank tea and all the other good stuff. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. It means the world to me that you guys like, comment, subscribe, all that other good stuff, and that you become members of the Patreon, if that is something that you can afford to do and something that interests you. But until next time, thank you all for stopping by, and hopefully I can see all of you in the next video. Bye-bye now.